So, Alan, why don't we start with, why don't we start at the beginning? Where'd you grow up?
I was born in October 1946, uh, down on the Ohio River, down in southern Ohio. Um, I lived with my parents and brother and sister for until I left left home and went in the military. Went in the Navy in August of 1965. Um, I became a Navy medic. I went to hospital school at Bethesda Navy Hospital. I'm sorry. Went to the went to hospital school at Great Lakes, Illinois, at the Navy Hospital there, school. Um, Left there in February of '66. Went to the Bethesda Navy Hospital, which is now called Walter Reed, there just north of Washington D.C. Went to operating room technician school there at Bethesda from September of '66 to um, April of '67. From there to Portsmouth Navy Hospital in the Norfolk, Virginia Beach area. From there to Vietnam in 1967. Left Vietnam New Year's Eve 1968. Um, had a little over a year of active duty left. By February the 2nd of 1970, I was separated from active duty. Went back to Columbus, Ohio, was engaged. Got a job working in the operating room at a city hospital here in Columbus, Ohio. Grant, like General Grant from the Civil War. Actually, my fiance was born in Grant Hospital. We're about the same age, so it didn't matter when she was born. Anyway, worked in the hospital there at Grant for 2.5 years. I really wasn't pleased with that. It was an exciting job, but I wanted to do something else. My father-in-law convinced me to take a job with a plumbing contractor. I did that for 3.5 years. Eventually got into the Carpenters Union here in Columbus, Ohio.
But so sorry, can I stop you there? I just want to.
Sure.
We're going a little fast. What was it that made you decide to enlist in the Navy?
Who all's going to hear the the Navy?
Yeah.
Uh, well, I started checking into the armed forces. When I was in high school, I was always kind of interested in bones and nerves and stuff like that. And so I got to checking into the Navy's hospital corps. In addition, and I was and it went when I started looking into this, I was informed that there were numerous other schools that you could go to with this line of work, and one of those was physical therapy. And I thought that's for me. I can get started on this career and become a physical therapist. But before I ever started into the physical therapy school, even though I had already extended my enlistment 9 months so I could attend this school, I decided this is not for me. Uh, so that's why I decided not to go to physical therapy school. I had the orders changed to operating room technician, and this happened when I was there at Bethesda Navy Hospital.
And what year was that?
We started operating room school the 19th of September, '66.
Okay.
Is that accurate enough?
Yeah, it's great. So your reason for joining the Navy was because you wanted that training. You wanted training
Yeah,
in healthcare.
yeah, I guess so. Never was on a ship.
Yeah. So I mean, the conflict in Vietnam was already going on by then,
Oh yeah.
and you volunteered, right?
Well,
You
yeah,
went.
I volunteered for the Navy. I also volunteered for Vietnam. And the reason that a moment ago I said, who all's going to hear this? And the thing that discouraged me the most about being a Navy medic was the Navy nurses. So, and later on, I find this to be much more noticeable. When we were in Vietnam, we were basically we were the Navy hospital corpsmen, and the guys with whom I worked, we were the operating room technicians. We were very well trained. We had nurses with us in the operating room. Now we're talking about the Navy medical people, not the Army. Army was completely different. We had these nurses that worked with us in the operating room were pretty much supervisors. We didn't need supervisors. We needed somebody to work with us who could pick up a knife and a pair of forceps and cut somebody. Now, if you couldn't do that, you wrapped up gloves and did all the sterilizing and stuff like that behind the scene. We did not need supervisors. However, the exact opposite was the way the Army was set up. The Army nurses did in Vietnam in the operating rooms what the Navy corpsmen did.
Mm.
And I didn't realize that until years later. So
Got it.
that's
So,
the reason go ahead.
so when did you arrive in Vietnam?
It was right before Christmas, 1967. And we flew into the in country. We flew into Da Nang. It was in the northern part of South Vietnam. It was about 60 miles south of the north-south border between North Vietnam and South Vietnam, the demilitarized zone, as it was called years ago.
You said you volunteered to go there.
Right, because I wanted to get away from the nurses.
Oh, I see.
But
Gotcha.
not at that point, not because of the operating room and the nurses working in the operating room as supervisors over us. I just wanted maybe I wanted a little more excitement than what was going on back state side.
Yeah. So when you got to Vietnam, you said you landed in Da Nang. Where did you go from there?
We went from there to a place, it was a receiving area, and it was called Tent Camp Tan Shaw. And it was on the east side of the river that separated Da Nang from the Air Force Base there at Da Nang. We were there for probably no more than 2 nights. Matter of fact, by this, okay, so when we got rid, so that's what we're doing. We're given all this indoctrination. We took a break one morning, and the guy said, as soon as the guy doing all the instructing, he tells everybody we're going to take a break, and then after that, he immediately said, "I need to have all hospital corpsmen up here right now." So we all went up there as everybody else is going to the bathroom or going for a smoke break, and he said, "Get your gear. We're taking you from here. We're going to take you guys over to the hospital." And that was the last time I was at Camp Tenshaw for almost a year. And so we were the next assignment is the Naval Support Activity Hospital, Da Nang. And this is about 3 miles south down the coast from the actual Da Nang proper, I'll call it. This was a real place. I used to say to myself, I will never forget this place. I don't know. I'm going to say we had like maybe 15 or 20 operating room technicians. We had, let's see, 3 nurse anesthetists, and we had, I don't know, by that time there in the operating room, we had 3 nurses, Navy nurses. We probably had 10 surgeons, and maybe another 5 or 6 what we call general medical officers, GMOs. And then after about 6 weeks is when the TED offense comes along. Actually, not even that long, probably closer to 4 weeks. This was you may be familiar with that, the 1968 TED offense. Okay, and so that was enough time. Excuse me. That was enough time for me to get familiar with what we do there. And then the TED offense arrives. It was not uncommon, Michael, for us to work 24 hours and be off for 24 hours. But when this TED offense thing came along, it was 24 hours, and then it was an additional 24 hours and an additional 24 hours. There was no stopping. We were absolutely overwhelmed. It got to after about two days of this, most of us had not eaten. And the entire operating room crew is working, um, and we haven't eaten. Somebody was smart enough to send one of us over to the dining hall and have the guy make us up sandwiches and oranges. The sandwiches were salami with mustard. I used to say I'll never forget the flavor of it. It was good. The bread was delicious, um, and then also chocolate milk. And for like probably at least 3 weeks, that's what we ate. And we usually ate around 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning, and then you wouldn't eat again until things slowed down a little bit. 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock in the morning. So when that finally came to an end, it's like, whoa, what do we do now? So several months would go by, and it seemed like every 2 months after, and this Tet Offense thing started about the end of January 1968. It seemed like about every 2 months we would have another offensive where there was a lot of aggression. We were overwhelmed with casualties, but not as bad as the 1968 Tet Offense. And I remember as months went by, and we'd get the new guys in there, and we'd be busy, and you'd hear one of them say, "Man, when is this going to end?" And one of us old timers would say, "If you think this is bad, you should have been here at Tet." And I've heard that phrase repeated numerous times. And one of the doctors one day said, "Listen, when they tell you you don't know what it was like, I'm telling you, you don't know what it was like." There was no stopping. I know there were a lot of casualties that we could have done something more, probably even saved a lot of them. But because of the injuries that some of these guys had, it was just not practical to try and save them when we had so many other people that we knew we could save. I never felt bad about that. That was not our decision. That would have been up to the surgeons and such. I never felt more valuable than the year that I was in Vietnam.
So you did just the one tour, the one year in Vietnam?
That's correct.
Yeah. And you felt like that was where you belonged, right? That was where your interests were and where your training
Yeah,
was. And
yeah, I agree with that.
so you said you separated from the military, from the Navy in what was it, 1970?
1970, yes, sir, February the 2nd, Groundhog Day.
Groundhog Day. And did you go back home from there?
Well, I drove from the Virginia Beach area to my hometown, was there. My fiance's birthday was February the 3rd, which is also mom and dad's anniversary. So I'm there late at anyway. So on the 3rd of February, I'm on my way to Columbus. Had dinner with my fiance and her parents, and then the next day I started looking for work there in the Columbus, Ohio area. Went to Children's Hospital, world famous place. Even back then, went to Grant Hospital, of course. I can't think. Ohio State, of course, and then and and eventually I was contacted by somebody in human resources, I guess, wasn't called that then, uh, and to come back to Grant Hospital for an interview. And later on that afternoon, I was hired by the people in human resources at Grant Hospital.
Hmm. And you also became a volunteer firefighter around that time?
Well, that would have been about 4 years later when Kathy and I were married in June of '70. So our first home, you might say, was a beautiful mobile home, and the lot where this mobile home was the most. It was the best spot in the whole area. I took good care of it. Anyway, we had that for 4 years. We bought a house out here in Fairfield County, which is where I live now in Fairfield County. Um, and we bought the house in April of 74. We moved, did a lot of work to it, moved into it in October of 74. Lived there from then until the September 1993. That at that time, the job that I had working as a firefighter at the Air Force Base here in Columbus was coming to an end as far as the Air Force was concerned, because the Air Force was paying the fire bill and the Air Force was leaving. And so, because of that, I was a permanent employee and I would be given a job, and it could have been any number of places, over 100. But when I filled out the suggestion form for this potential job, I pretty much picked everything east of Indianapolis. And that was on a Thursday. Wife and I are going through a divorce at this time. Worked Thursday, off Friday, worked Saturday, off Sunday, worked Monday, came home Tuesday. Phone rings. I'm thinking I probably won't have to do anything about this job for 6 months and probably won't have to leave for a year. When I came home that Tuesday morning, the phone rang. It was the Air Force Base Rickenbacker's human resources people, and the lady on the other end of the phone said, "We have a job for you." And I'm thinking, "Whoa, well, what? How much time do I have to make up my mind?" And this was Tuesday morning, and she said, "Friday." Whether I took it or not, she said, "If you don't take it, this ends the Air Force's or the government's job, not responsibility, whatever it is,
Obligation.
of obligation." Yes, sir. Thank you.
Mhm.
Of finding you a job. So I go in the next day and talk to the girl. I'm heartbroken and all this other stuff. And this would have to have been an absolute blessing, the way this all happened, Michael. So it really was. And then as soon as I signed the paperwork and everything, and things really started rolling. Excuse me. And the next thing I know is I'm getting calls from people that movers, and then I get a call from the fire chief down in Arlington, Virginia, and just one thing after another. And then
So this,
myself and
sorry,
two other
forgive.
firefighters would be the three firefighters from the Air Force Base here in Columbus, Rickenbacker, that would be given a job in Arlington there at Fort Myer. And again, Fort Myer is the Army post up on top of the hill behind Arlington Cemetery.
Yeah.
And
So you, so just
I
to,
was there. I think my first day was September 11, 1993.
that was your
And
first day on the job.
yeah, but
Mhm.
it was like what 8 years before
8 years.
9/11.
Yeah.
So everything went well there. I became involved in a lot of things there at Fort Myer. Worked as a volunteer with the National Park Service. Worked at the Vietnam Memorial. Would get about 300 hours a year as a volunteer. You know, and every other day, the way our schedule was, I would be off, and every other day, on the morning that I was off, I would be heading across the Potomac, down through the cemetery and across the Potomac River and over to the Vietnam Lincoln Memorial and work there at the Vietnam Memorial. The tracings that you've seen people, volunteers there with the yellow hats make, I've probably made over 10,000 of them. It'd be kind of neat to know how many I have made, But it was very special being in the Washington D.C. area. I got to meet a lot of interesting people, um, just people you read about in the magazines and history books and stuff like that, and just a lot of simple common folk that you would somebody else might recognize as somebody super special, and here it is, you're having lunch with them someday.
Hmm.
How am I doing?
You're doing great. I wonder, so that was a lot to take in. So now it's September of 93. You're in Fort Myer, Virginia, and
Correct.
over the following years, somewhere in there, you decided to start volunteering as a tour guide at the wall.
Yeah, that was, I would say, first of all, you got to understand, way back when, I was quite and still the hillbilly. I would I would go from Fort Myer, Michael, through the cemetery and out in front of the cemetery, and I would stand there and look across the Potomac River over into DC, and I would say to myself, I don't want to go there. I was that intimidated by the city. And then eventually, excuse me, I'll get it later. And eventually, I thought, well, hell, I need to keep my exercising up, because I lost so much weight at leading up to this. Not so much, but leading up to leaving Ohio, and the divorce and everything. So I managed to go across the river, and I would go to the Vietnam Memorial, and so I ran into these two girls there, Emmeline Gura, who has passed away, and Suzanne Zagona. Suzanne is now lives in Denver. And so then a couple of days later, I do it again. A couple of days later, I do it again. So the girls are recognizing me, and by this time, I'm sure I've met some of the other volunteers. Tom Baxter, um, retired Navy guy. His wife during World War II taught the pilots how to read instruments in the airplanes during World War II. Interesting. Anyway, and so Suzanne and or Emmeline uh, said to me one day, she said, "Well, if you're going to be here this often, you want to volunteer with us and be one of the volunteers in parks." That's VIP, volunteers in parks. I really wasn't crazy about that, but that's what I did. Um, yeah. And so I would, like I said, I would get about 300 hours a year there. In 1995, leading up to the Memorial Day weekend, or I'm sorry, the Veterans Weekend in November, one of the National Park Rangers says, "Hey, I need you to write me up a biography because we want you to be the volunteer who sits on the stage that represents all the other volunteers." So I did. No big deal. And then the next time I'm asked to do this is November 11, just after 9/11 on 2001, just after 9/11.
Mhm.
And I'm sitting with Barry McCaffrey. He was an Army general. He was in charge of the first Gulf War. And some guy named Jim, who kind of looked like Arnold Schwarzenegger, but he used to be the president of America Online. I don't know who he was. I didn't know who most of these people were.
Mm.
But anyway,
Well, let me ask you a question about that time that you spent as a tour guide. It occurs to me that, you had your own very personal experience for a year in Vietnam. And then I'm wondering how the time you spent as a volunteer and talking to all of those people and hearing all the stories. I mean, 300 hours a year is a lot of time. I'm wondering how that experience changed or enhanced your own experience having been in Vietnam? Like, do you think about Vietnam differently after spending time at the wall?
um, okay, let me start out by this. In 1990, and I'm probably going to get a little emotional about this. Bear with me.
Mm,
About 1990, I had an opportunity to drive to Washington, D.C. I had a friend over there, Karen, who was like a sister to me. Her mom lived there in the Washington, D.C. area, and I hadn't seen her for 17 years. But all I really wanted to see was that memorial. Hang with me, okay? And so I go to Karen's house. She gives me a subway ticket. I actually thought the subway, you know what the subway is, the metro.
yes.
You've seen these rides in these theme parks where these people are sitting in this chair, and their feet are hanging down, and
Yeah.
they're going like this.
Mhm.
I thought that's what the metro was. Anyway, so I make my way down to DC, and I'm walking up, and there was a guy there. I said, "Which way is the Vietnam Memorial?" And he pointed that way. So I started heading in that direction. I walked all the way along what was then the reflecting pool, which is all new. And I walked clear up in front of the Lincoln Memorial, and I'm thinking to myself, where the hell is this thing? So I looked around, and back over the other way I could see it. So I said, there it is. I'm telling you, Michael, I started walking, and I didn't get any closer to it than where the flagpole is. And I'm thinking to myself, there's something wrong here. There's something really wrong. And I don't think I can do this. And that day, I couldn't do that. I found myself walking out into trees, out in the area where the memorial for women in the armed forces would be built, back and forth. I got so upset that I couldn't even look at the damn thing. And I'm thinking to myself, hell, I came all this way and I can't even do this. So I headed back to the subway and then back up to Bethesda and so on. That was my first experience there. 2 years later, well, the next year I go there again, but I'm helping Karen do some stuff on her house. The year after that, we're doing all this stuff, and I said to Karen, would you be willing to go take the subway down to the Vietnam Memorial? She said, sure. Completely different. Completely different. I found myself making 2 tracings of a name of a guy that I was in Vietnam with. He was a combat Marine. When I was over there, I was at the hospital, and we're getting ready to watch this movie. And the movie was called Fantastic Voyage with Raquel Welch. You ever heard of her?
Yes.
Okay, well, she's supposed to be wearing a 2-piece bathing suit. Well, I look out there in the sand where all the benches are, and I see Tom Lynn from Pomeroy, Ohio. I said, I know that kid out there with the white hair and the funny nose. Matter of fact, his friends called him Beak. Yeah, funny nose. And I always called him Tom. So anyway, so I showed him all around the operating room. He wasn't too happy about that. And but make a long story short, Tom, that was in May of '68, and Tom was killed the day before his 22nd birthday in August. And so anyway, I made 2 tracings of his name. The first 2. And so many times when somebody would be over there, they would say something like, hey, I saw you making these tracings. I don't know anybody that died in Vietnam. I don't even know anybody that went to Vietnam. Would you be willing to make one of these tracings for me? And I would say, yeah, come on. So, and that was the name that I would do it. I must have done over 100 just for Tom Lynn's name. I remember a funny story. This is just one of them. I was there one day, and you ever heard of a guy named Joe Montana? He's an actor.
Yeah, the actor. Yeah, sure.
Yeah. All right. So I saw him over there one day, and I'm thinking, golly, the guy looks like the guy on TV. Well, then there was this girl there, and she had 2 children with her. They turned out to be his family. I didn't know that. So this girl comes up and she says, I know anybody that died in Vietnam, and I saw you making these tracings. Would you be willing to make one for me? And I said, sure. So now we're going up the west side of the wall toward the Lincoln Memorial, and her old man says, and I guess by then I realized that they were together. And I said, where are you guys from? She said, California. And I said, what kind of work's your husband doing? She said, he's an actor. And I said, well, I thought that's who it was. I still didn't know his name. So he yells at her, and he goes, and she's with me, and she goes, where are you going? She says, he's going to make a tracing. He said, well, we'll do it here. Do this one. She turns and she goes, no. And we'll keep on walking. And she says, yeah, here, do the name Garcia. And she says, no. And she looked at me and said, Andy Garcia is our next door neighbor. So I went up there and made the tracing of the name, wrote all the information pertinent about where he was from, U.S. Marine Corps, where he was, when he was born, when he died, and I ended up with her pen. I always felt bad about that. Anyway, so, and that's not the last time I saw Joey Montana. I'd see him over there often. You know, that was just one of the many stories there. We called that place the Magic Place. Those of us that worked down there were just these incredible coincidences. And one of the stories, they wrote several books about some of the stories that had been reported by the volunteers. One of them was about me, or was written by me. Well, anyway, this girl named Libby Hatch, who's since passed away from a motorcycle wreck. She was Jan Scruggs. Remember Scruggs?
Yeah.
Okay. She was his right-hand person, and the Girl Friday. And I mean, she could get anything done. So she sends this letter out, sends me a letter. She sends everybody else with one of these, machines, computers, and she wants everybody to write down an interesting story. And so that's so I just didn't get around to it. Well, then she called me up and she said, I want to know where your story is. So I ended up writing her 2 stories. Well, when this book comes out, which probably cost about 11 cents to print, it goes all over the country. And what has happened, it's called fundraising. People send for 11 cents, they send in a $25 bill or something. And so when the book comes out, there were 12 volunteers that wrote these stories. There just happened to be 13 stories, 13 stories in it. And 2 of those 2 stories were mine. Well, the first one was, I'm working there and I run into this guy, scruffy looking guy, had a beard, gray hair, and he wants me to make a tracing for him. And I go, and this is back when we had this great big New York City phone book looking book directory. It had all the names and where they're located. So we look up the name, sure enough. So I go over here and I'm running a little bit late, Michael. Normally I have a certain window where I got to get across the river and get out of town before the traffic loads up. So I said, okay, what's the name? So we get the name and go over and make tracing and hand it to him. And he says, here, I say, here, have a nice day. Well, he goes, well, wait a minute. I got about 8 or 9 more names. I go, I said, okay, let's go. What's the name? And he goes, well, they all died the same day. And that tells me that they're all right there in a paragraph. So I go back over there. Here's one, here's another. We made about 8 or 9 of them. And then the guy is standing there and he opens up his wallet. I'm thinking, yeah, here we go. And so instead of pulling out a $5 bill, which we don't take anyone's money for that. So instead of pulling out money, he pulls out this business card. And on the business card, it said Carlos Hathcock. And he asked me, do you know who this is? And I said, yeah. And he says, I want you to have this. Hathcock was a Marine shooter, sniper, famous. They wrote books about him.
Oh, that's right.
Hathcock had signed the back of his card, so he wants to give it to me. I said, listen, my son is in Marine Corps boot camp right now. When he gets out, I'll give him this card, and I'll have it laminated like back in the old days. They would laminate your ID cards. Okay, and so that was one of the stories. And then so when the book comes out, and I think Libby gave me like a dozen copies, and but this book goes all over the country. So then all of a sudden, I don't know, a month or 2 later, I get this letter from this guy from Arkansas. And who the hell he got? Well, the first letter was actually from Scruggs. I'm thinking, I don't send him any money. So I open up the letter and there's a letter inside it. And the letter is from this guy from Arkansas named Conley Bagby. He was a Marine. And Hathcock also was from Arkansas. And Conley Bagby and he were in Vietnam together. And so so he writes this letter in there. He says, for some reason, I ended up with this book. And the more I read your story, I recognized it was me that you was talking about. And so I finally got off I got on the phone and called him. And sure enough, I got to keep in touch with him. He was a volunteer fireman, clear up in the northwest corner of Arkansas, in a town called Siloam Springs. Conley Bagby has since passed away. But I kept in touch with him for like 5 or 6 years. And And then I also got and I have Conley Bagby's original letter. I also have a card from Joe Hathcock, that's Carlos's wife, down there in Virginia Beach. I still have the original card from that, and she wrote the note and said that Carlos has a lot of respect for hospital corpsmen. That's just one, and those two. That's the first story in the book. The second story was in the wintertime, we'd be there at the wall looking out to the south, and the sun's out there in your face. You'd stand there with your arms out like this. It's warm, you know. And so that on a day when it was maybe cold, maybe the sun wasn't shining, crows would come across the road down, like come across Independent Constitution Avenue. They'd crash land out in the grass out beyond the wall. They'd walk back toward this black wall. And they would stand there and flap their wings, Michael, and caw at their reflections in this wall. And so I wrote a story about this. It's funny. I mean, all of us had seen it. It's funny. But I was the one who wrote the story, wrote about it. So those are the two stories that ended up in that book. How am I doing?
You're doing great. You're doing great. I do remember, now that you mention it, there was a book called,
Why Vietnam Still Matters.
no, it was called, there was another book I'm thinking of that was called either Badass or Badasses, and it had the Hathcock story in there. That's
Oh,
where
is that right?
Yeah, that's where I recognize the name
Yeah,
from.
Carlos was injured. I don't think he didn't spend all 20 years or whatever. He was injured in an Amtrak explosion, and he had some severe burns. But when I met Conley Bagby, he's telling me about Hathcock, and he said it just broke my heart to see he had MS, or Hathcock by that time had MS or some other debilitating neurological problem. But that's what Conley said about that.
Yeah,
Anyway,
I think he had to, maybe still has the record for the longest, I guess, kill shot.
yeah. You have an interest in firearms?
No, not particularly, but
It's too
I have an
bad. You need to get one.
is that right? I have an interest in amazing stories, and his is an amazing story for sure. And speaking of amazing stories, so you're working at a fire department in Fort Myer,
Exactly.
on September 11th, 2001. Can you kind of
Yeah,
walk me through that day?
sure. That was a Monday. I'm sorry. Let's back up a day. Um, Monday was a day off. Monday was a day off for me, but um, our entire fire department, with the exception of 6 people, had to take a class, firefighting class. Believe it or not, Michael, the class had to do with airfield firefighting. Myself and 4 or 5 other guys that already had this class, we didn't have to take it, but several of us would be the ones that got stuck going down to the Pentagon heliport and manning the fire truck down there. The fire station at the Pentagon is located on the west side of the Pentagon. Um, Actually, the fire station that I'm talking about at that time was brand new. Also, we had a brand new fire truck there that cost about $300,000. It was an airfield type vehicle, heavy, big, carried a lot of water, carried a lot of foam, stuff like that. Whenever there are any helicopters coming in and out of the Pentagon, there's going to be a crew there to operate the flight control tower, and the tower actually sat above on top of the firehouse. Also, when you've got flying down there like that, there's going to be a crew there to operate the emergency fire vehicle. Those 3 peak crew members that morning were Dennis Young from Carroll County, Ohio, Mark Skipper from Buffalo, New York, and myself. I was actually there Monday on the day of this first class. I was there Monday. Dennis was there also, and John Pine was the 3rd firefighter on Monday. That was an off day for me, and I knew I was going to be there all week because of this class. So that night, Monday night, I stayed in the firehouse, everything up and running on Tuesday. We get down to the heliport. And on Monday, George W. Bush arrived about 9:30 that morning. He's going to get on the helicopter there at the Pentagon heliport. He's going to the helicopter is going to take him over to Andrews Air Force Base, which is over in Maryland, about 12 miles away. He's going to get on the Air Force One, and he's going to fly from there to Sarasota, Florida. If you recall, he was down there to congratulate this group of young children, second graders or something, and and compliment them on their reading skills. So while he is down there, okay, so on Tuesday is when he goes to the school. His travel day was Monday. So while he is down there, this is when we have and Bush is scheduled to return on Tuesday back to the Pentagon at noon. So this is early in the morning. They talk to the school kids and stuff like that. During this time, everybody becomes aware of the attacks in New York City, and not real sure exactly what's going on. And then eventually the attack at the Pentagon, and then eventually the United Flight 93 that crashed into Somerset County, Pennsylvania. So anyway, so that's the scenario. So here it is, Tuesday morning. Everything is up and running. We're ready. I got everything all set for Bush's return at noon. Our first helicopter was doing about 10. Could have been anybody's helicopter. We become aware of this other stuff and the other attacks about 9 a.m. And so, like I said, everything is all set for Bush's return. The fire truck is parked outside of the open end of the firehouse. It's pointed perpendicular away from the Pentagon. It's about 30 feet from the opening of the apparatus door of the Pentagon over to the passenger side of the fire truck. And the back of the fire truck is probably about 10 feet away from the Pentagon. I parked the fire truck there that day, Tuesday, also on Monday. I wanted the fire truck out of the firehouse long before the Secret Service people get there. I have seen this in the past and you're going to have an enormous amount of vehicles coming down there when this entourage comes over, the whatever the hell it's called, when a bunch of cars get together. Anyway, so I wanted the fire truck out of the firehouse before the Secret Service people bring their 3 Chevy Suburbans and park right in front of the entrance to the firehouse. And oftentimes the fire truck is still in the building. So I wanted to have that definite easy access from the fire truck out to the heliport, which is only about 75 yards away. And I had done this exactly. The fire truck is parked exactly in the same place as I parked it on Monday. Everything is cool. Mark and I are tinkering around. We know about the attacks in New York. We're tinkering around the back of the fire truck. He climbs down out of a compartment there, and Mark and I began to walk to the front along the right side of the fire truck to the front of the fire truck. Dennis is in the firehouse there, and he's probably watching the New York City news. There is no warning, Michael, of what's in front of us or what's about to happen. No noise, no nothing. Skip and I get out beyond the fire truck, maybe 10 or 15 feet. Skipper is to my right within the arm's reach. We're talking about guns or the Marine Corps or something, I don't know. And a flash or something about a 45-degree angle off to my left caught my eye. And when I looked up, there was the airplane. The airplane is about 200 yards away from us at this point. It's approaching the Pentagon at about a 45-degree angle. Like I say, there was no warning of any kind that there was something in front of us that was really wrong. And so the first thing I realized that something is wrong is we see the airplane. Immediately, as soon as we see the airplane, we are enveloped in this very loud, incredibly loud noise. It was so loud, Michael, that it damn near drowned out the noise of the plane hitting the building. I've heard a lot of people doing a lot of the interviews talking about just before their feelings, just before the airplane hit the Pentagon or wherever they were, they hear this sound like the airplane is slowing down or whistle or something like that. I can't argue with somebody wanting to say that, I think it's a mistake on their part that that's the way they recognize it, because Mark and I were outside the building. The airplane is right in front of us, and the only thing that we heard before the plane hit the building was the noise. I'm sure it was from the engines. From the time we saw the airplane, I think I took a lot of static about what I said when I saw the airplane. But Skipper and I saw it, I guess, basically at the same time. Um, uh, I would say no more than 2 seconds or 1 second, maybe, from the time we see the airplane until it hits the building, and it's over. There's nothing there outside the building that you'd ever know that there was ever an airplane there. It was nothing but a field full of burning trash, just like a dump. A tiny piece. There was out around the heliport. You couldn't put your foot anywhere in any position without touching something. It was just thousands and thousands of small pieces of something. Part of it was the building. Most of it, I'm sure, was the airplane. Because of the approach to the airplane's approach to the Pentagon, I would say it's been documented. The right wing was pretty much parallel to the building and the Pentagon. And if you happen to see the hole later on after some of the smoke was knocked down, it was like a sideways keyhole. It was like, instead of having the thing pointing down like this, it was over to pointed to your left, and that would have been the reflection of what, because of the position of the left wing. We've always been told that they believe it was the left wing. It hit the left rear part of the fire truck, crushed it, and also tore the left rear wheel clear off of the fire truck. Mark Skipper, 10 seconds before that, were standing right there on the opposite side of the truck, over on the passenger side. So just one of the miracles that happened that day. So I am running. I completely forgot about Skipper. I forgot completely about Dennis. I'm running. My thoughts are very clear, Michael. I'm thinking, now we're being attacked. We are running. I suppose by the time we actually started running is about the time the plane actually hit the building. So Skipper, unknown to me, is going off about a 45-degree angle off to the right. I am running pretty much parallel to the Pentagon. I am on the outside of the fire station. The Pentagon is here. The fire station is on the west side of it, and I am on the west side of the fire station. I remember the noise. I remember when the plane hit the building, it was just a crunch, not a remarkable noise at all. Plane hits the building. I'm thinking, oh, hell, plane has hit the building. I better run until I catch on fire, and after that, I'll do something else. So then I feel the pressure from the explosion, and then I feel the heat from the fireball. So there was no doubt about it. Mark and I were in this fireball, and the heat was bad, really hot. Our Ford van is parked right out in front of me, facing north, facing the direction I'm running, and I know the van is there because that's how we got down here that morning. So I decided to dive forward, and when I stopped sliding on the brand new, smelly, new blacktop, I am between the driver's side front and rear wheels, and I crawl underneath the fire truck, and I'm completely underneath the fire truck. The trash and everything is falling down, and I crawled out from underneath because the reason I got out from underneath the fire truck is it was when it was hot, when it was bad before, it was really hot. I wasn't worried about the fire truck or the van blowing up or anything. I needed to get farther away. So when I'm crawling out from underneath the van, I see Skipper out to my left, and I ran out and grabbed him and yelled at him. I said, "Are you okay?" And you can expect what he had to say. I said, "Get your shit on. We got a lot of work to do. I'm going to the fire truck." And I left him and I ran back to the burning fire truck. This is when I first see what has happened there. There was nowhere, like as I said, where I am running back toward the fire truck. I'm not walking. I'm not jogging. I'm running. I need to get back to the fire truck. My plan was, because of the fire was so huge, I'm going to use the phrase "behind the fire truck," referring to maybe. Is that thing working still? Okay. And uh, and I'm thinking, need to pull the fire truck away from the building. Well, at that point, the fire wasn't in the Pentagon. The fire that I'm looking at is 50 feet high. It's the fire truck's on fire. And so I left Skipper, run back to the truck, get in, left the passenger door open, put the headsets on, tramped on the, started the fire truck, punched the brake off and everything, tramping the accelerator. Skipper will eventually be outside the passenger door, and he's trying to catch my attention, and he's doing this. He wants me to turn off the fire truck. I don't know why he was worried about. I'm just trying to figure out what I have done wrong and why does the fire truck not do what I want it to do. And so I see Skipper do this several times. Apparently, when I'm tramping the accelerator, it makes a noise. The actual noise of the accelerator hitting my. Okay, you guys. I'll talk to you later. Sorry about that, Michael. And apparently, according to Skipper, every time my foot would tramp that accelerator, flames would blow out of the back of the fire truck. And well, apparently there was quite a bit of damage to the engine compartment back there. And the Skipper wanted me to shut off the fire truck. And like I say, I don't know what he was worried about. I was still trying to figure out what I've done wrong. Eventually, give up on the fire truck. I shut it off. I make the radio call to Fort Myer. My radio message is coming from foam 61. That's the crash truck to heliport. My message was just simply foam 61. That's us, Fort Myer. We have had a commercial airliner crash into the west side of the Pentagon at the heliport, the Washington Boulevard side. Come at once. I went on to describe the airplane as a 340 Airbus. Am I saying it right? No, 320 Airbus and a 757 Boeing. There is a difference when I do this, when I tell this story. I'll say, if you want to know the difference, see me after class. Just a little humor there. I see Skipper doing this again. I take the headsets off and throw them up in the dash, kill the engine, grab my helmet and threw it out of the bus, grab my radio, a lantern, a bag of personal goodies, and my face piece. I carried this stuff out of put it on the floor, got out of the truck, took it from the floor of the fire truck and put it over between the firehouse and the van. I figured it was in a place where it wouldn't be a lot of traffic. I would know where it is. I'll be able to, because I'm going to need it later on. However, I was not able to use any of the stuff later on because of all the other things going on. That's when I come back into the firehouse. First thing I notice is the suspenders on my fire pants are on fire. So I tramped on them with my left foot. I'm looking into the back of the fire station, and there was a tree in there. It was probably, no doubt, part of this magnolia tree that was on fire right behind the fire truck, which if you see some of the pictures, you'll see a lot of the big branches broken off. But what it looked like, Michael, was a Christmas tree that was upside down and was on fire. And I'm looking at it, and I'm trying to put my boots and pants on. It's like the shortstop on the baseball team. He's looking at the runner, and he's looking down for the ball. And he keeps looking up for the runner, and he looks down for the ball, and he doesn't make the play. And I'm thinking, how did we get that tree down here this morning? You know, crazy thought. Well, then I finally, before I had a chance to put my stuff on, some guy comes over and grabs me, and he said, if you can help me get in this window, we can get these people out of the building right behind the fire truck. His name was Blair Bozek. He was an Air Force Academy graduate, Lieutenant Colonel Air Force, and he flew the FR-71 spy plane. You familiar with that? Okay. And I hold this guy responsible for the people that came out of those 10 or so dozen people that come out of those two windows right behind the burning fire truck. I have since become familiar with him and his family. His father was a World War II bomber pilot in Europe and the Pacific. His parents are living in Pittsburgh, and they're still living. Anyway, this went on. We get done with all the people coming out of the building. So now I give up on that operation. I go in the firehouse to put on my fire pants. By this time, what I thought had tramped, where I thought I had tramped the fire smoldering suspenders, they had continued to burn. So if you see a picture of me carrying this big yellow fire hose later on on the fire ground, you look over my left shoulder and you see that half of my suspender hanging down. No big deal. Hell, I didn't need suspenders. My pants fit good, Michael. And so I got that on. I got the sock hood on. I got the fire coat on. No gloves, no helmet, no breathing apparatus. Of course, the boots are part of the pants. I grabbed a fire extinguisher. I grabbed 2 fire extinguishers and went around the back of the fire truck. I took the carbon dioxide bottle and I pulled the trigger on it. And I'm trying to put some fire out underneath the truck and up on top where the generator was. It's not the product. It's not the fire extinguisher type that you want to use on something like that. I threw that thing aside, pulled the safety pin on the other bottle. The other bottle was a 20-pound Purple K. 20-pound is the size. Purple K is a dry chemical fire extinguisher that's potassium, symbol K. Potassium bicarbonate is very good on electrical fires, I guess. Pretty much any kind of fire, but especially liquid fuel. I go in the building through this and into the building. I'm in there about maybe crawling, stepping over carefully over top of stuff. Eventually I get down on the floor. When I thought I would see what appeared to me to be fire, I would pull the trigger. I got this big battle lantern in my left hand. I got this fire extinguisher laying on the side in my right hand. And when I thought I would see something, I would pull the trigger and it makes a loud noise. And about the second time I do this, a woman yells, "Hey," I'm telling you, Michael, it was the furthest thing from my mind that I would run into somebody in there. And I was so startled. The only thing I could say was, "Hey, back." And one of us says, "I can't see you." And this lady claps her hands. And we're yelling back and forth. And her name was Sheila Moody. I keep in touch with her. And she worked for the Army accounting area, and that's where she was in the building. So at about this time, another name appears on this story, and his name was Chris. Should I have read this before I came here or not? I'll think of it. He was an Army Ranger, great big kid. And he intercepts this woman, and he and she are going out of the building, and they're walking out. She has seen that what she thinks is an electrical fluorescent light hanging down. It's long, oblong, and she sees it, and she's reaching for it, trying to push it out of her way, but she's getting closer to it, but she can't touch it. Well, about the second or third or so time that she tries to push this thing out of her way, she sees people in what she calls this light. What she's looking at is the door that I came in. And that's where the people were. They were outside the building. And so they're out of the building. I don't know what I did with that second fire extinguisher. It doesn't matter. When I get out of the building, shortly after I go, I guess all this, here comes our company from Fort Myer. And I remember almost immediately I helped 4 or 5 guys carry this one guy who was unconscious. And I often I never really thought about this, Michael, for years. Maybe not until maybe 3 years ago. They've got this guy. He's unconscious. He's on the ground, and I thought to myself, we'll say 3 years ago, why didn't I say, wait, let me see if we can get some do some CPR on this guy or something. See if he's breathing or whatever. Didn't look like it. That kind of bothered me that I never thought to do that. If I could get fired 4 or 5 breaths into him, let's pick him up and carry him all the way out to the guardrail. I just didn't think of it. And so when we're doing this, now we're starting to be, now I'm starting to interact with our people coming from Fort Myer. One of the things, I think while we were carrying this guy, I look down and I see this big yellow fire hose. If I'm not mistaken, well, this is what I thought at that time. This yellow fire hose tells me that Fort Myer is on the scene. The reason I say that is because, if I'm not mistaken, Fort Myer was the only fire department there in Arlington that had yellow forest fire hose. And as I tell this story to the groups, I say, this tells me two things. Number one, Fort Myer is on the scene. And number two, I can't remember what number two was. And that's the way I tell it. So from that point on, it was pretty much recognized that we're going to do whatever we can to help the companies and our crews and everybody. Ended up taking all the equipment off of the fire truck so it wouldn't burn up, all the breathing apparatus, all the spare bottles, all the tools, power cords, floodlights, stuff like that. And eventually we got the third breathing apparatus and got it out of there so it wouldn't be damaged. And about this time, we're starting to be recognized that Mark and Dennis and I are all three hurt. Am I boring you? You okay? You okay?
Yeah, I'm great. You're not boring me, please.
Anyway, maybe you didn't want to talk this long. So anyway, from that point on, I guess, Michael, we're pretty much gophering. And eventually, we retreated by a med unit. They picked us up, had oxygen on me, cut my T-shirt with a pair of scissors. Later on, I don't know where Skipper got this. He got some duct tape. And I would show up in the hospital with my damn T-shirt split right down the middle. They got like 3 big strips of gray duct tape on it. Anyway, my mom has the T-shirt someplace, and I've got the trousers that I was wearing that day. So eventually, Mark and Dennis and I, eventually Mark and I were transported to one of the Arlington hospitals. Eventually, we were able to get a ride back. Skipper had a laceration on one of his hands and had some sutures. He had an X-ray. They didn't X-ray me. They washed both of our arms. Our arms were all scratched up and burns and stuff here. You can't see this stuff. The cuts when I went to take my trousers off in the emergency room there was tiny pieces of something that had stuck through the trousers, and they were sticking into my boxer shorts, and just, I think, melted metal or something like it. Anyway, we get back to the fort. Everybody's glad to see us. We've got all the public affairs people there from Fort Myer, and God, I don't know who all was there immediately. And give you an idea of how busy or at least how busy I was, I did not realize that those towers had fallen down until sometime after 2:00 in the morning. Yeah, so I grabbed my phone book out in the car and called all the women that I know. That's supposed to be funny. And then Bobby Cornally later on was talking. He was in the dispatch office when all this happened. And one of the public affairs gals said, "Well, you must have really been busy in there with all these phone calls." And Bobby said, he says, "Wouldn't have been so bad if all these women had been calling to see if Big Al was okay." So I thought that was, and we're, as you can imagine, Michael, those of us that were there at that time, we're starting to lighten up a little bit, and I began to realize just how serious it was. So eventually, of course, our people got a lot of recognition. We, a year later, we ended up going to Kansas City for the big Department of Defense awards. Mark and Dennis and I, about 6 more of our other firefighters. We've done numerous videos, all the small ABC, CBS, NBC, History, Disney, Discovery, all these videos. We've got one, we've got one with National Geographic from England, some girl named Ellen. I think I might have mentioned that to you. I have no idea who she is. We've got something going on in Arlington County. It's going to be a video. I think that's the history one. I think they're going to have something local for the firefighters, past and present, there at Fort Myer, right around the actual anniversary. Anyway, we also we got invited to come to Fort Knox, Kentucky. Well, when I tell this story, when I pretty much get to the point where I am now, I say, "Would you like to know what happened to the fire truck?" Well, most people probably will. I say, well, the fire truck would eventually, and we knew it was going to the junkyard because it was going to the junkyard over a period of about 7 or 8 years. People have access to this thing, and they're stealing souvenirs off of it, like buttons and stuff and handles. And somebody stole the damn bumper off of it. The thing had to weigh 150 pounds, Michael. Anyway, they ended up this government contractor, Bose Allen Hamilton. They ended up getting the fire truck, taking it to Fort Knox, Kentucky, and that's where it is now. And right now, it's in General Patton's Transportation Leadership Museum. And my fire coat is in the New York City Manhattan Museum. I said I could have sold it on eBay. That's supposed to be funny too. How am I doing? Hey, Michael.
Oh,
Paula.
you can't hear me. No, we're good. We're good. We're good.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for that account. I'm curious about how you ended up leaving Northern Virginia and returning to Ohio, and when and
Oh,
why.
good. In 2004, one of my high school friends, Diane, her husband died. And by this time, I was working on the tour bus in DC and Arlington. So my sister, well, anyway, I found out that Diane's husband had died. So I came back to Ohio. My brother lives over here about 2 miles from where we are right now. And so I came up here and visiting mom and friends back home. And certainly, as a matter of fact, the first place I stopped was Diane's house, letting her know that I was here. And then so when I come up here, I'm leaving my brother's house and I'm coming out here to where I buy that in front of the house where I live now. And there's a sign out in front that says sold. So I thought, hell, I remember the nice lady that lived here. She and her husband were from West Virginia, and he was a coal miner. So I pulled in there and went up, and knocked on the door, and I asked a lady if she remembered me, and she said, of course. She said, you were the guy that collected the old-fashioned miners' lights. And I said, well, I still do. Well, make a long story short, I ended up buying 3 of them off of her, which I still have. And these are the old-fashioned acetylene miners' lights. You've probably never seen one. Okay. And so
The ones that you strap to the helmet, like the
yeah,
headlamp.
yeah. And so we talked for a while, and I said, well, I'm glad your house is sold. And she says, well, it's not sold yet. We've had 3 or 4 people, invest in it as far as what is it going to take to buy it. And none of those worked out, and we're not happy. We're not sure it's going to get sold anyway. And all of a sudden, and I said, if it doesn't sell, would you consider calling me? And she said, yeah. So I gave her my phone number. And that was right before Thanksgiving, Ed, Michael. And just after, right around Christmas time, she called me and told me it hadn't sold. I said, listen, I'm planning on being in Ohio. I can be at your house on the 4th of January of 2005. The closing was the 20. My son's wife did houses, so she knew all about it. She did all the paperwork, no realty fees, was no longer under contract. Story of my life. Got to meet you, didn't I? And so that's really the way it went. And then moved back here. The closing was the 23rd of February, and we moved. Keith and I, my son flew down to Dallas, and we had everything loaded that night and took off the next morning. we left on a Saturday morning. We left where I was living, and we were back here at about 6:30 that night.
Thank you very much for this.
My pleasure.